Hey, welcome to the 42 Sports podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Kazhila. This is a space built primarily for athletes where their stories are told and shared with the world. The name 42 means for the athlete to the world, and that's exactly our mission. Along the way, we'll also dive into everything happening in our wonderful world of sports. So whether you're an athlete, a fan, or just love a good story, you are in the right place. Hey, welcome to the 42 Sports podcast. My name is Joshua Kazhila, and it's such a pleasure to begin this journey with you on the very first episode of the show. So before we dive into today's topic, I want to share the heart behind 42 Sports and where it all began. It has felt like a long time coming because around early to mid last year, I felt a burden to shine the spotlight on individual athletes instead of just the schools or the teams or the clubs that they represent. Because what I saw around me was major representation of the specific organizations, the teams, the clubs, and the schools and whatnot, which is not inherently a bad thing. But I began to think, how much more could these individual athletes, especially amateur young athletes, how much more could they benefit from a platform that seeks to promote them first, as opposed to promoting teams or schools and organizations. And so that's the vision of this podcast, to create a space that builds up athletes and shares their stories with the world. Going back a few years, I was a high school athlete, and some of the, I used to think, what would my athletic journey, what would it have been like if I had exposure to the rest of the world? Would that have meant maybe more scholarship opportunities? Maybe more exposure to worldwide opportunities and facilities and whatnot. Because for a lot of kids around me, the journey ended in high school, where I feel a lot of people, maybe not everyone, but a lot of kids were talented enough to at least take their athletic abilities to the next level. And that might have been at a university or at a semi-pro club, whatever that might have looked like. But because of that lack of exposure, I feel like a lot of people missed out on the opportunities that are there. And so now we're seeing like a bunch of guys who are in their early 20s, a bunch of girls in their early 20s, and they're sitting there with athletic abilities, but they don't really have anywhere to display those abilities. And so that's the vision of this podcast, to create a space that builds up athletes and shares their stories with the rest of the world. Now, I won't always be interviewing or speaking with athletes directly. Like today, sometimes we'll be recapping the big fixtures from the weekend. But no matter what, the focus is still the same: to support athletes while still being real about the tough conversations, whether that's about performance pressure or the challenges that athletes face. So if you care not just about your favorite team, but also about the individuals that make up the team, then I think you're going to really enjoy this space and this podcast. Looking at this weekend, something that I didn't enjoy. I'm a Manchester United fan, and this weekend wasn't great for us in the Premier League. We unfortunately lost 3-1 to Brentford. But before we get to that match against Brentford, just looking elsewhere in the Premier League, and as a United fan, it warms my heart whenever Liverpool loses. And unfortunately, nowadays, it's not that often. But it was great to see Crystal Palace beat Liverpool 2-1. Chelsea also suffered defeat against Brighton 3-1 at home at Stamford Bridge. Enzo Maresca's team is looking like they're taking a step back from last season, especially coming into this season being the Club World Cup champions, the champions of the world. It's kind of a disappointing start to the season for Chelsea. Man City seem to be picking up form, beating Burnley 5-1, and I think Newcastle versus Arsenal, that was a great game. I was able to watch some of the second half and just seeing how Arsenal showed resilience. Maybe this year might be different compared to the previous few years, where they've got the personnel, they've got the talent, they've got the skill, but maybe the mentality is lacking. But the mentality that the team showed yesterday, oh my gosh, wow. That looks like a strong team, and maybe Mikel Arteta is finally getting through to his players and is implementing some of his ideas when it comes to the mental aspect of the game. But today, I want to focus on United. 3-1 to Brentford. Yeah, this fixture couldn't have gone any worse. wow. Like, I expected, especially after the Chelsea performance, I expected a stronger response from the United team, because even that Chelsea game, it wasn't all too impressive. Okay, besides the opening few minutes, pretty much before Bruno's penalty, we were average. We were standard. And I mean, Enzo Maresca made a bunch of changes early on into that game. And even then, we couldn't really dominate the game. But eventually, we won the game. And so that was good. Like, a win is better than nothing at this stage, especially for this current Manchester United team. But coming into this Brentford fixture, you're not thinking this is going to be a challenge. Brentford, they're also not having a great start to the season. They've gone through a lot of changes. I mean, one of which being Brian Mbeumo, who is now a United player, who didn't really shine against Brentford, but they've lost Visa and they've lost the manager as well, the previous manager, Thomas Frank, to Spurs. So this Brentford team is still finding its feet. And so the fact that they were able to dismantle United 2-0 very early on into the game, that's concerning. The final result being 3-1, there's not really too many positives you can pull from that performance. When Brentford scored the third goal, all I did was I just switched it off. I stopped watching, proceeded with the rest of my weekend, because this was the early fixture. And I like early fixtures because you're the first up, you're the first ones to play. And, you get to see your team before having to watch the rest of the Premier League. But honestly, it just ruined my mood for football for the rest of the weekend. And I only actually watched the Newcastle and Arsenal game, but there were a bunch of other interesting fixtures, one of which being Crystal Palace versus Liverpool, and Crystal Palace ended up winning. But all in all, to say, Ruben Amorim is probably in a lot of trouble, deep trouble. I don't think he has what it takes to get out of this hole. And the thing is, I actually like Amorim. I think he's a great guy, especially in front of the media, very charismatic guy who, sticks to his ideas, sticks to his beliefs, his belief system. But I think if he's not willing to change his system or his formation or the way he approaches different games with this United squad, then I'm not too sure what's going to change. These players, they've been very disappointing this season. Just little things, just passing the ball, the defensive line. I mean, the first goal that was conceded, I was shocked. I think even the Brentford players were shocked. The Brentford fans were also shocked. Nobody could believe that was actually a goal, and it eventually was a goal because Maguire lost his man and everything. But that's besides the point. Generally this season, besides that Arsenal game, which is so frustrating because we came into the season with a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, but all that excitement faded away. And maybe that was even, maybe the season was gone when we played Grimsby and we lost to them. So for Ruben Amorim, I'm not sure what more he can do to salvage his job at United, his future at United. I think, he is on borrowed time at this stage. But again, there's a deeper part of me that wants him to succeed, but I don't think he will, which is sad because we are going to have to go through another cycle of finding a new manager, adapting to his system, buying one or two players that fit his wants and how he wants to play. And then the cycle repeats again. So there's something seriously wrong with the club. And it will be interesting to see what Ineos does, because they came in and they were very militant almost in their approach, firing a bunch of staff members, getting rid of some of the players. It'll be interesting to see how they handle this whole Amorim situation, because he's not going to change his formation. He's not going to change his system. He's not going to change the way he does things. So, very disappointing from a United point of view. And look, every weekend we won't really be speaking about United this in detail this much. It's just, that's my team. And that happened over the weekend, and for me that was the standout fixture. Besides Liverpool losing 2-1 to a very good Crystal Palace side, managed well. I think, that United-Brentford game, very disappointing from a United fan point of view, but just in general, United just looks to be struggling quite a bit. But moving on to some more positive news, the Springboks defeated Argentina 67-30 in a very dominant display from the men in green and gold. So what I can say about that performance is Sacha Feinburg-Mngomezulu. Like, there's nothing else to say about that performance besides SFM10. There we go, SFM10. That's what he calls himself. The 23-year-old Somers fly-half, who's literally around about my age. I mean, 37 points in a single test match for the Springboks. I don't know if I need to say anything else, but that I can't remember a more impressive display of personal brilliance in rugby over the last few years. I mean, I think Cheslin Kolbe has had a few standout performances, and this is no shade to Cheslin Kolbe and Kurtley Arendse, but this performance by Sacha Feinburg-Mngomezulu, I think, sets him up, or he puts himself on notice. The rest of the world has to acknowledge and see that, hey, this kid actually has quite a bit of talent and potential. And I think the Springboks have definitely found their long-term fly-half solution. And Sacha Feinburg-Mngomezulu, although I still think his goal kicking is a little bit shaky, maybe not as inconsistent as Manie Libbok, slightly better, but definitely not anywhere near the levels of Andre Pollard. And so if he can get to that level in his kicking game, then I think he's a complete fly-off and he's a legend. He's a GOAT in the making. And so it's going to be interesting. The Springboks versus the Argentine team this Saturday in London at 3 o'clock. And that's going to be an interesting game just because of the whole context of the Rugby Championship. The Springboks actually started off the tournament quite poorly. They came in after maybe an average test series against, I think, Georgia and Italy, and so now when they versed the Wallabies first up, they struggled and they ended up losing, and they also lost the game to the All Blacks. So after that first All Blacks game, that first test where we lost in Eden Park, it wasn't looking too good in terms of winning the Rugby Championship. I think at that stage New Zealand was probably leading, they were probably favourites, but it's the Springboks that are in pole position at this stage, and I'm excited to see what Rassie Erasmus is going to cook up for the final fixture of the Rugby Championship. And the Springboks have this competition in their hands, essentially. I think they've shown that they can put points on the board against a talented team like Argentina, but even New Zealand, I think in Wellington a couple of weeks back. Like, this Springboks team should deliver. And I know Rassie's probably telling his team, his squad, not to get too ahead of themselves, and especially Sacha Feinburg-Mngomezulu after that amazing performance. But the Springboks are in a good place and they're looking quite strong. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think they still have another gear to reach. I think once they get into, or once they figure out their team, once they figure out their starting 15 and the bomb squad, then I think approaching the World Cup, this will be a very confident team, and I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to, I think it's three-peat. Yeah, they should be able to three-peat the World Cup as things stand. But again, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. This team, this Los Pumas team, is still quite the challenge, and they're a talented team, but I think with the momentum that we have after dominating in Wellington against the All Blacks and then dominating the Argentinian team in Durban, I think there's no reason for us to struggle against Argentina. And on that note, that concludes the very first episode of the 42 Sports podcast. And I hope you have a good rest of your week, especially if you are a United fan, because you need it, I need it, we need it. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you know somebody who loves sport, whether they're an athlete themselves or just a passionate fan, share this podcast with them as well. See you on Wednesday, where we will be discussing more global sport and also reacting to the team that the Springboks have put out for their final Rugby Championship clash against Los Pumas. I'm Joshua Kazhila, and this is the 42 Sports Podcast. For the athlete to the world.